Hey, welcome to the Story Studio podcast. Today, we were actually going to do a show. Well, that's not an interesting story, but the bottom line is that we do have a shorter time
You
period
sure you don't
today.
want to tell it anyway?
Yeah, I'm just realizing I put myself in the audience's shoes and go, oh, wait, that's just for me. Nobody cares. So we do have a little less time today. And so we thought it might be interesting as we sort of near the halfway point, the 5/12ths point anyway, of the year, that we'd sort of say, this has been kind of a weird year. Some of us have things related to all the weirdness in the world, but some just normal half a year as a creator. What have we learned? What have been the revelations that have come? What would we, I don't know. Anything else there? I feel like I'm rambling. The one thing we've sort of learned this year or
I
figured
think,
out about
it's been, I think everybody realizes that, we are living a Black Mirror episode this year so far. And that's just kind of weird. But for us as a studio, I think we've had a very productive year. And even though there's been a lot of craziness, I think that we've refined what we're doing. We've gotten stronger. We're going into the second half of the year. I feel prepared and, I don't know, happy for the most part, strong. But I do think there's also been a lot of lessons this year. And so what is the biggest takeaway? As we go into the second half of the year, what about the first half of the year makes you feel prepared for the second?
I feel like I have been living a Black Mirror episode all my life, and now it's just catching up to everyone else.
Oh, well, that's good.
They're starting to see the shit I always saw.
It's like Dave finally finished that project and passed out those They Live glasses.
Yes.
See the world through Dave-colored glasses.
I see dumb people.
I don't know that I would ever want to see the world through Dave-colored glasses. It's just, first of all, half the people I meet would be called Stan. And
I did put a stand in the book I'm working on.
Oh, I was wondering because I didn't see one in the outline, but
It's just a throwaway character.
That's perfect. That's just perfect. It's basically,
I'll make sure I have one more by the end of the episode.
Yeah, it's no, you can't do two in an episode.
Yeah. I'll just it'll be the red shirt in Star Trek. Stan's gonna die.
But no, I do love the idea that every book has a Stan, and it's like John Ratzenberger, for
Pixar. Yeah.
It's pretty awesome.
Norm. All right. Well, I will go first. I don't know how well formed and articulate. I don't know how well formed this idea is, or how articulate I'm going to be able to be about it. But I do know that so if you guys have been listening to the show, then at the end of most of last year, it felt like I was in the project that just kind of wouldn't end. Now, the wonderful thing there is that project has, after my turmoil with it, it went to Sean, who did a whole bunch of work on it and then handed it over to our editor, and then he's going to get it back and do some other work. And it's apparently turned out very nice. So despite my, shitty feelings about it, it was just shitty feelings of process, I suppose, and trying to muddle through it, but it turned out well, which is good. Because sometimes that isn't the case, and you realize that you spent a bunch of time and then it turned out to be shitty. But that wasn't an easy process. And so after that, when did I start Reboot, Sean? Was it right at the beginning of the year? I think I had a little bit of stuff maybe beforehand.
You mean this final version?
Well, the only version of Reboot that I wrote.
Well, no, you started it a while ago.
Oh,
right?
well, that doesn't count. No.
Okay.
I mean the current version, yeah.
Okay, so
beginning of the year, though, right? I don't think I had anything else.
I think that you did it right after the Monster Project. You finished,
which is the point. So that's good. That's what I'm trying to make. So the project after that was the final book in a series, a 5-book series that we actually wrote years ago. We wrote the first 3, and then I feel like there was a break, and we wrote the 4th, and then there was a huge break again before the 5th, something like that.
Yeah, we wrote the 3rd and the 4th back to back, but the 4th didn't get released for a couple of years.
And that was when we rewrote the 2nd. So the 2nd book was actually written twice. And the reason that I'm mentioning any of that is because it's the 5th in basically a stale series. Now, the series, as far as the readers were concerned, it wasn't stale at all. People were really excited to hear that this was going to conclude, and I really loved the way that it did. But my point is that project, the first one back from kind of the real heel dragging sort of project, was not an easy one. having to go back and reread, 4 books worth of stuff and refamiliarize myself with the world and draw the lines together at the end of a series isn't necessarily an easy thing, but yet that did feel good. And then what I'm writing
good on the page, that happens to be what I'm editing right now. And Johnny in his ultimate form is showing up.
Just like that lady with the chicken nuggets.
That's who I was thinking of, actually.
Yeah, she assumed her ultimate form. If you don't know that one, just Google chicken nugget rampage, something like that on YouTube. It's pretty good. I just watched that recently. Anyway, the point is that the project that I'm on right now it's actually kind of interesting because I was going to say, well, this one's easier. This is the first one that feels like fertile ground that I get to kind of make up my own rules. But that's actually not true either. It's the sequel to another book that we wrote a long time ago, but there was just one. And because of some kind of magic eraser things that happen at the end of book 1, it does feel a little bit like fertile ground. Like we have a lot of new characters, mostly new characters, that sort of thing. So the point is, like, the journey of relearning a lot of that mojo and spirit, just kind of like, I noticed it this time. The first time it was just kind of there. The first time it was like, well, that's the next step. This is how I'm evolving. And I didn't think about it. There was no meta. There was like, well, how do I write, or how am I inspired, or what's best for my process? And so we actually, I'll set that aside for a second, but it's been, that process of relearning has given me a lot of insight into the way that I work that I didn't have before, which I think is interesting. And I think that kind of know thyself introspection can be really especially useful for a writer. If you go on autopilot in day-to-day life, you might do a bunch of stupid things because you're not paying attention. But as a writer, if you do it, it has an effect that shows up on the page. And so being able to be aware of sort of my strengths and weaknesses, and like, I actually never get fooled where I look at the finished result and I go, wow, that's much better than I thought, or wow, that's terrible and I thought it was good. Like, I know when I'm writing. So being able to sort of know and have that feedback in real time, I knew I was going to ramble on this, but it's that knowing yourself sort of thing has.
Well, how will you apply that to the future? So how are you going to keep Johnny on track? And like, how will you know when you're going off track, or you're not in your sweet spot, or you're going into some sort of a doldrums? Like, how do you avoid that, knowing what you know now?
Okay. So I'll go back to that thing that I sort of set aside a second ago, and I will just mention again that I think that I just said this, but I'll reiterate it, is that I know in real time if what I'm producing is good. I'm sure there have been exceptions. I'm sure there are times when I've been like, oh, this isn't very good, and I thought it was. But if they are, they're rare. Like, I know in real time, which is nice, because it's like in the days of, old 35 millimeter cameras that, worked on film, if you shot you were looking through a separate viewfinder and you had the lens cap on and you didn't know until you got your film developed, like, there's this lag time. Oh, fuck, I need to take the lens cap off, but it's too late. So if you've written an entire book without that sort of acuity as to whether it's working or not, then it isn't helpful. But what that's done for me is, so basically Sean wrote the beats for this new book for me in a different way than we've written before. And it was an attempt to lean into what we already sort of felt we understood about my process. So I started as a pure pantser. I couldn't kind of make anything happen. And then we said a few times in print and on the show that I evolved to somewhere in the middle, which is the middle between plotters and pantsers, where I have beats and then I kind of follow the beats. But then I feel like I'm actually even further from that, where I'm in this weird place where if I get a set of beats and then I try to follow them, I used to be able to follow them. Like, I used to be able to, Sean would give me beats, here's 40 beats, A to Z, and I would just follow them with small deviations. I don't do that at all anymore. Now it's kind of like this weird grab bag thing where, like, okay, well, I guess this is going there and this is going there. And so only the world and Sean's first few beats are the only things that ever matter, because I can't use a beat that says this person does this when that person died unexpectedly or something like that.
I don't know. It's a zombie story, right?
It is a zombie story. So Sean wrote me beats this time that were a grab bag. So I got, I want to say 7 or 8 different storylines, and sort of like a thumbnail for each, like, this is what's happening in one sentence in the storyline. And then maybe a few possible scenes, a brief description. and a lot of character and stuff, and some additional world stuff, even though we already had a lot of world stuff from the first book. This is the sequel to Dead City, by the way. It is a zombie book. And interestingly, that has kind of worked. And I'm trying to figure out who I am as a writer, because now I do have this grab bag of beats, but only in the vaguest sense. So it'll be interesting to see, Sean, when you look at this.
Well, yeah, I have no idea, and I don't remember if that was Bonnie's idea, the grab bag. It might have been.
It's certainly interesting. I don't know if it's totally the right approach, but it was definitely worth the experiment. Even if
no, actually, I'm gonna say no. The idea probably came on a call with Bonnie, but I'm gonna guess it wasn't her. It's actually Bonnie's on the call.
Well, it's important that we nail down exactly where this idea.
Well, I'm trying to remember why, but I think Bonnie's so exacting. You know, Bonnie's outlines are this happens and this happens and this happens. But I think it was in that quest to give you a different model to try. It might have been like, hey, let's try grab bag instead, like that approach. Right. Because I do like the idea that you're not as fenced in. It's constant idea generation for you, which seems to be what you need in a draft more than something prescriptive. This happens and this happens and this happens.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see what we do next time. So we should do like a postmortem when this is done. Say, what did I like? What didn't I like? It's still probably a little bit too prescriptive. And I know you're not trying to make it prescriptive, but it probably is unnecessary work to some degree. Because what I find that I'm doing is I don't look at the beats at all anymore. So you gave me a bunch of suggested beats, and maybe I hit the first one or two and then had a general idea what I might do. But now I don't even look at them. I do keep that panel open as a quick reference in Scrivener, though, because I keep going back to it kind of remind myself of what in general was going on in the storyline. But what I actually ended up doing a few days ago was rewriting what I understood to be the 7 or 8 story. I think there's six storylines, or 6 major characters that I was following, 6 or 8, something like that. And sort of where were they? What did I think they kind of needed to do? And then I wrote next steps. So like, you know, for Eli's storyline, who you don't even know, because Eli is not in the original beats at all. You don't even know who that is. Like I have, you know, he'll do this and then he'll do this. And what I'm finding is that an ensemble, multi-storyline sort of thing like that is super hard to keep track of, because I keep wanting to make them into several piles, not a bunch of piles. So what I'm doing right now is kind of moving everybody together. So anyway, long story short on all of this, what I think I'm finding is I just need to be more comfortable with the fact that I'm definitely closer to the pantsing end of the spectrum. And I think when we started, that was a problem, because I didn't know how to connect the pieces. I didn't know how to move the ball forward. And so beats worked. And then thinking about story structure worked, and then story structure failed me because I went past the tipping point where it was helpful to when it was a straitjacket. And beats, it's almost like I changed, I evolved past them in a weird way, because I think I am pantsing now. Neo. But I'm pantsing with the confidence that I didn't have to begin with. It's like that knowledge is all in there.
That's great. I think I was actually talking to Neve about this. I want to say today. Because
then you should, if you want to.
No. Here's what's actually really funny is this is the story that Johnny almost started, and then he said no, that is not relevant. Look how it comes back around. So this was originally going to be an episode about collaboration, but that was what we had called last week's episode. So we decided to pivot into this other thing. But I was on a call with Neve when I, opened it up, and I said, "Oh, today's thing's about collaboration," and didn't we just do that? And she said, "You just said all these amazing things about collaboration today, about working with Johnny and Dave. Why don't you just say that stuff?" So I'll say that stuff now because it is relevant. So what I was telling her was I was talking about how the edit for Reboot is going, and how the monster project before that, how that went. And I feel like we've worked there's 2 things. We've worked together for a long time now, but I also think our relationship broke through something in the last few months where you're just feeling your creativeness And
Yeah, I got some high level thoughts on that too, but not for today. It's kind of interesting.
for so that's just seems like you're in a really good spot there creatively, and I feel like I know you better than I've ever known you, personally and creatively, and I have more confidence in our creative relationship, and so I'm just approaching the copy in a different way.
God, you sound like lovers.
And well, you're
Oh,
coming
like
too,
you
honey. Yeah, like uh
Dave's all like it rubs the lotion on its body.
what's hilarious about this, or not hilarious, but just kind of interesting, is the first time I feel like I had this kind of understanding and kind of control over the edit and what it turned into was Robot Proletariat, the original Robot Proletariat, a long ass time ago. And I remember that, the end product of that was just so lean and just a really good read. I really like that original book a lot. It's one of my favorite things that we've done. And I think that over time, I didn't edit as strong as I had in that one. It's like I trusted our process more, but in a different way. Now it's almost back. And it's what's funny is that this is the 5th Robot Proletariat book, and the one that I'm feeling it back again is like in the same series, and I just feel like I know what to do with Johnny's words. Like I just got it. I can just go in there and do it. I understand him. I understand what a first pass needs to feel like, what a second pass needs to feel like, and I feel like we can create better art in less time because we understand each other more. And I feel that way with the last thing I edited of Dave's also. Like I've just been doing it enough with him that like I don't have to question it as much. Like because everybody needs a slightly different edit. Like that's it. People are different. Writers are different. The things I need to pay attention to are different. But I can edit both of you now at this point without thinking, and it's such a thoughtful edit, if that makes sense.
Well, okay, so to bring this full circle before I hand off the mic, because this was supposed to be sort of revelations or things that I learned this year, I think, so 2 things. Number one, well, okay, I could make it one thing. I could make it one thing, which is leaning into who I really am. And maybe I'm just really kind of learning who I am as a writer in a new leveled up sort of way. But one of those components is, you know what, I think I am maybe a little more of a pantser than I thought. And now I have the tools to do it. Like I think now if I wanted, I could start with the vaguest of a premise, Stephen King style, where he just says he has an idea and write that book. I think I could do that now. And I couldn't in the past. I know from experience. Curiously and sideways to this is what I've talked about on a few episodes recently, is leaning into sort of who I am as I'm actually not that much of a collaborator really. And that's not actually something I was meant, but there is that. But then the other thing is just small things. Like I used to kind of watch my phrasing a little bit because I'd realized that something wasn't, I don't know, quite right. Or I'll make references. Like I made a reference in an email the other day to Snidely Whiplash. It was the mustache twirling thing. And one of the readers responded and said, I really enjoyed this email, blah, blah, blah. And the references, I wonder if a lot of your millennial readers won't know who Snidely Whiplash is. And I said, honestly, I kind of don't care. Like I like to make references that I know that like a handful of people are going to get and the rest of the people are going to feel like they're missing something, as long as it's not story essential. So like the book, I don't know how much of this you've seen, Sean, but in the 4th Robot Proletariat book, we introduced a character who basically had his heyday in the 80s and the 90s, the 1980s and 90s, and he's just that old. And so, there's some of those threads that I sort of unspooled there, I continued into this book, and I'm just leaning into, you know what, like Tarantino's always making old references to the 60s and 70s, and I guess this is what I do. Like, I guess I'm just going to mention RoboCop and shit and just lean into it and say, okay, I guess that's who I am as a writer.
Yeah, okay, so that's a really good example. I'm glad you brought that one up, because I kept most of those because I know, like, okay, that's important to the style of this book, to the tone of this book. That works. We already set it up in 4th. But if there's, let's say, 10 of those, probably 7 of them stay, but 3 of them get in the way of the story. It becomes more about that reference or that joke, and it like tings on the reader. So it's like, stay down, right? And I want Johnny to write every single one of those that he thinks of, right? Because that's in the flow of writing. They're there. but then that's my job to make sure that the 7 that stay are better because there's not 3 others distracting from them, if that makes sense.
No, it makes total sense. And if I were doing my own revision on that book, I probably would do the exact same thing.
Right. So it's just, it's nice to be in that sync. I feel very confident now that the things that I take away from Johnny or from Dave, if I'm taking something out of their book, then I feel confident they would agree with that decision. Or
not if you take out my piss scenes.
Or I've never taken out your piss scenes. By the way, we had an old book being proofread a couple of weeks ago, and I kept getting screenshots from the proofreader about like, because one of our books had 3 piss scenes in like one book all day.
3? Wow, I wasn't
I'm just
trying
putting
hard enough.
together. This is why he liked the Angry Birds movie so much.
Right. Yes.
Because it's a
That's where
pissing
this all comes
scene.
from, yes.
It's a pissing scene. This particular book predated that Angry Birds, so he can't claim.
No. Angry Birds is a result of that clause. Dave is
Right.
he's got a water sports fetish apparently. All right, so on that
With
one,
birds only.
So
he's got an
Gross.
aviary water sports
Yeah.
fetish.
anyway, to finish that thought, I feel like I'm pretty confident about anything that I cut, you guys are going to agree with, and anything I add, you're going to agree with. But I think in the past, I've played it a little more timid because, I really hope that they like this thing that I'm going to change. Where now I feel like you guys don't want me second guessing my own changes. Like that's my job. I'm supposed to be there. And if I second guess everything, then I'm not actually doing as good a job. I just need to go in and treat it.
And God forbid if you ask us, then it's not helping us either.
Right. So I think that really a big revelation for me, this actually isn't the one that I was going to pick, but I do think it works. A big revelation for me this year is just really, really trust the process. I mean, especially when you have collaborators that you've been working with that long. When Bonnie goes over my stuff, I just trust it. Like there's not any, I don't want to see every single change. I mean, I will if I'm studying something specifically, but I want to have that collaboration where I trust that whatever is changed was done for a reason and the book is now better, because we can never see our own work. Like that's just not possible. We think something is great. There's an example of a book right now that Bonnie's working on that I think the word count might be halved. I don't know. Like it's substantial. So that's fine. I can't cry over all these words that I lost. I'm happy that someone I trust is getting the best possible version of that story. And I know that, the monster, the monster book that Johnny's talking about.
It's not actually about monsters.
is really, really long. That needed a lot of surgery. I think 50,000 words or something. Although that's such a long book, that's not
right.
even,
That's just
that's not even that much gone.
Well, I mean, that actually makes perfect sense. 10 to 20% is usually what's cut.
Yeah. So anyway, Dave, what was your big for the year? Your big revelation?
Maybe that I'm less of a pantser.
Maybe.
I'd say yes. I love that because I agree. I've always thought that on you.
Yeah.
My thing with Dave for years has been begging him, can't we figure some of this stuff out in pre-production? And by nature of our most recent project, we've had to figure it out in pre-production.
Well, and I think this is a blessing because I still need the pantsing part of like finding the story. And previously our outlines, we only spent, a few days, maybe a week at the most on any outline we've done, I feel like, for our own stuff. And it just isn't enough time for me to find the story. I need time for it to ruminate. And, we took 2 or 3 weeks on this one, and it gave me time to have those false starts, to have what I thought was a good idea, but then have the better idea.
Right, because it's never right there. There's always another better idea right behind it.
Dave, you may be about to say this, but the project that you're talking about, are you talking about one specific project? You're talking about the new one, right?
One we're doing with Sawyer, yeah.
Okay, so have you started writing it yet?
Yes.
Okay, because that's what I was curious about, was whether it turned out to be true so far. Anyway, go
So
on.
far. So anyway,
He's had Mac problems this week, but
yeah, I've
no
had
story
Mac
problems.
no story problems. I got 99 problems, but a story ain't one. Mac is 98 of them. Anyway, so yeah, it gave me time to find the story and then find what I didn't like about it, what it needed, and all that. And there might be things I still change. Like there's one thing I have changed in the story so far, but it's a minor change. And probably some things that I'll add that aren't in there yet.
Marie said Stan dies, which is hilarious because I think that is actually an accurate statement.
Yes, there is a Stan and he dies.
Did you write that letter to Eminem?
Yes, I
I'm
did.
thinking maybe.
So and the other thing, like, I'm confident that I could sit down and pants any short story. I did 3 of them, earlier in the month or last month, whatever it is. I don't know. Time is like ceased. Or I could write like a smaller novella, I think, and pants that and do a really good job at it. But for a more involved story, I need to plot it out. I need to go through the process of, pantsing it in the beat stage, and then, having Sean and Bonnie look at it to find what might be missing, because like the payoffs need to be there, and Bonnie's really good at seeing those connections in a way that I get lost in the weeds, and it's like I can't pull out enough to look at them and see them because I'm so fucking far in the weeds, and I usually don't see them until, oh fuck, it's too late, and then I gotta go
You've
fix
been
it.
super great about seeing that feedback and iterating from it, though, really well.
I'm curious why Barney loves Dave, according to Marie. Anybody know what that means?
Because he loves you.
Everybody.
You love him.
Yeah, everybody.
You're a happy family.
Maybe it's Barney Fife.
Well, okay. So Dave, do you feel like, how do you feel like that will take you forward? Same question as Johnny. Like, how will this help your process in the future? So when you feel like, because you kind of at this point know, right? You can smell it coming when you feel like a derailment.
I can smell what the rock is cooking.
Yeah.
Sometimes it hits me out of the blue. Hopefully it won't happen in this project. Well, I can't. Obviously, we're on a really tight deadline.
Yeah. Okay. So what gives you the most confidence in this project? Is it because you have collaborators and a timeline, or is it the outlining of the story?
It's that I don't have doubts in the story. And usually most stories that I start, I have doubts. I'm like, well, I'll figure it out. And I don't have any doubts with this so far. And if they are, they're really minor ones that I know I'll, have no problem with. Other times, like when I've had stories, like there's always a doubt, but, we need to get shit going and we don't have time to fucking,
So I feel
take
a little
3 weeks to do a fucking outline.
In asking this question I'm about to ask, I feel a little bit about like somebody who walked into a happy marriage and said, are you sure that it doesn't piss you off when she loads the dishwasher on? But I am curious. So you said, everything makes sense and you don't run into problems. Is there any part of you that wonders if you'll invent something as you're writing that could snowball and cause problems? Or are you feeling pretty confident you can keep it on the rails?
Well, I'm feeling confident.
Problems into Dave's head's a really good idea, Johnny.
No, I feel confident for the first season. Second and third season, I don't know, but we'll figure that shit out as we get to it. Like I have worries and concerns, especially matching up with Sawyer's story. Like all of that's going to be a logistical nightmare, but hey, we'll figure it out. So right now I'm trying not to think about it. If I do, then I'll just get lost.
That's good. No, keep
put my head down.
Yeah, I was asking that sort of personally because I'm finding that I can do that less and less. Like I do have a widening, like it's that metaphor of flying to Hawaii and being off by 1 degree. Like I do that right away. So I was wondering.
So it's nice to have, to be able to move into standalones and things like that. Not that Amazon's especially supportive of that. All right.
What about you, Sean?
Yeah, for me, it's a cousin to what I was talking about earlier with editing you guys and just knowing it's about trust. I think that's true just about the process of everything. And if you look at how many times we've developed stuff and banked stuff and had to pivot, and we think things are ready and then they get tabled and, you know, they emerge later. I just feel like there's always a reason. If we didn't launch something, there was a reason for it. If we didn't pursue something, there was a reason for it. If we didn't say yes at a decision and we needed to take a breath, there was a reason for it. And it's just been awesome to watch all of that, you know. Just know that kind of taking our time, and I think this is the longest stretch ever where as a company, we've just kind of been really allegiant to, this is our vision, this is how we're getting there, and however long it takes and however, you know, many pounds we have to lift on the way, it's worth it. And
that doesn't surprise me at all. It's the perfect coming together of natural seasoning of mainly you, right? Like you're 10 years older, and Neve. Like I feel like that's the perfect, you know, perfect storm for that sort of.
Well, we have
moderation.
the business structure with me and Neve, and a lot of help, and then we have, I think, the story structure with me and Bonnie, and a lot of help. And I think that really we are in a place where we can just grow really fast if we make the right decisions and are paying attention to the right things. Like we have spent 10 years dabbling to where we had the right structure for all of this. It's really awesome.
Does any of that affect your personal process?
That's a really good question. My personal process, I think right now takes a back seat to the company. But I'm always paying attention to what works and what doesn't, and what I can do better, you know, once I have more control over it. But there's a couple of things right now that stand in the way. I mean, Neve lives in Ireland, so we do have a time difference there, where the ideal time for me to be talking all of this stuff out is bedtime for her. So that's really not fair. And the ideal time for her is maker time for me. And so that's not super great, but it is what it is. And I'd much, much rather use some maker time to build an amazing business together than, you know, get some more words in. So it's just making time for everything. And right now, a lot of my personal time and personal process is being used to get other things off the ground, like working with primarily Neve and Bonnie to, you know, design these commercial series. And we're doing that for every single author. So that requires time for every author. So my personal flow, it's been more observation right now, and, you know, get ready for what works and all of that. But July 17th, which is our, you know, unofficial birthday, I have a lot of things lined up to be done by then, so I can have more control over my schedule and personal flow in July, and I think it will be better then.
Do you find it interesting or noteworthy, this would be for everybody, that all three of the things that we just said, all three are about, to some degree, accepting something that was already there? They are. None of them are about like, I discovered this great new ninja technique or something. It's all about like, boy, I think that I'm settling into sort of who I am. You know what I mean? Does that make any sense? It was about the natural settling and order of things coming around at the right time.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that there's settling into a collaboration also, you know, settling into that relationship. So Dave said a few times about like, oh, it was really nice to, you know, be able to spend time on this outline. And that's one of those things where I think that he's trusting in our collaboration more, and he's willing to hear that more, because that's the question. I'm like, why can't we spend more time on the outline? Why can't we spend more time on the pre-production, so that you're not finding these problems and having to rewrite it? But we would get to just a certain place, and no, I'm good, you know, and then no, I'll figure it out. But it's like Dave has slowed down to speed up, if that makes sense. So for
I always felt like I needed to rush the outlines before, because, you know, we're always behind deadlines and shit, and I wasn't thinking, you know, that I had the option to go
but the math is simple. Like you would
I know it is now, but I mean, I didn't see it. So
right. But that's what I'm saying. I think now you're able to see and hear things that you weren't necessarily before, and the results are showing up, you know.
Yeah, and my trajectory has been similar this year too, Dave. I mean, I don't know how long this can possibly persist, but we actually kind of don't really have deadlines on the Realm and Sand side right now. And that relaxing of like, oh my God, through the Monster project and then even through Reboot, I kept sending Sean texts. How much more time do I have? How much, like, am I behind? I felt behind constantly. And that was counterproductive, I thought, because the worrying about trying to finish was impairing the finishing. So like the book that I'm in right now, I mean, I do move at a slower pace than I used to. So I would say my daily average I used to shoot for 6,000 words a day. And now it's like 4,500, 5,000. So it's not a huge diminishment, but it is some, but it's like clockwork. And days when for some reason I have compressed time, I still get it done. And the words feel really good, despite the fact that I'm having to like reset after each chapter and kind of choose the new next chapter. And, but it's that slowing down to speed up or slowing down to improve is hard to do for me because it feels like there's got to be an obligation here. Like, even if we don't have anything on the calendar, I know that Sean's getting pissed at me because I'm taking forever, something like that. And that was always detrimental to the end product and I think ultimately the schedule. But I'm just curious what you guys think about that.
Yeah, I think it's knowing yourself. Joe makes a really good point here, right? The outline just doesn't feel like the work. Writing the draft feels like the work. Sometimes I rush the outline to get to the thing that feels productive, right? But telling yourself the story and knowing the story, and I've seen Joel do that a bunch of times actually, including this last one where, okay, here's the story. No, I got it. I think if I remember this correctly, we even had a conversation before he started about, does it need a story jacket? No, I'm good. I'm going to go. But, then we talked last week and he's got a new idea for it. And he may have found that in the outline. He may not have. He may have needed to write 30-some thousand words to figure that out. That happens to Dave too. But it's worth considering that the outline is real work. And that's an exciting thing. And if you can tell yourself the story thoroughly in the outline, then the draft is just naturally going to be better.
Right now I'm thinking of the outline as an abbreviated first draft.
Mm-hmm.
I think
that doesn't work for Johnny. That doesn't work for Johnny at all.
No, and I've tried a bunch of times. I think that it's important for us as creators to acknowledge that the process, like from the very first spark of an idea through the completed book, that's going to take a certain amount of time, and everything between those two endpoints is the process. There's this tendency to think, well, no, I'm going to like think about a book, I'm going to form it, and then when I start writing, that's the work. And we have this sort of Puritan work ethic thing that says, well, if you're not fingers on keyboard or pencil on paper, you're not working, and therefore you're doing something wrong because you're not working. And for us, taking quiet time and taking a walk is work. It is necessary to getting the book done. Watching great TV or movies, reading great books, like those can be parts of the process. Knowing to stop after you've only gotten 50% of your daily word goal because it's really hard and you can do better tomorrow, that actually is a productivity decision in the positive side if you don't do it too often and don't justify it. But I think that that's real easy to forget and to feel like, you guys mentioned outlining, but daydreaming, planning within sensible limits, of course, are all parts of the process. And we kind of need to forgive ourselves a little bit and just let it happen.
Yeah, I feel like I'm working a little bit when I'm watching TV or movies because I think...
And you should, because what if you said, I can't watch any TV or movies because I need to tell stories? That'd be the stupidest decision ever.
Right. Well, it's, I think we said this last week. It's that what writers read every night, right? That's writers write every day and read every night. And for me, I read every day because I'm always editing or working on stuff in addition to writing. But I do watch something every day. I just make it part of my day, my vocabulary. And
well, you're also doing audiobooks still when you're walking, right?
Yeah, I do. So I think that you do want to put that stuff into your schedule. Johnny's absolutely right. Daydreaming is worth time. It makes you
putting in your schedule, but also giving yourself permission when it happens. Not feeling like shit. I really should be working. I really should go working in air quotes. Final wrap up question on all this. This just sort of occurs to me. Now, I absolutely despise getting topical, but this is a question. Do you think that quarantine, isolation, rethinking of life, any of that, has had an impact on this? Because all three of us gave sort of introspective answers to this. that had to do with self-knowledge and accepting who we are. And it sounds like we all went to a self-help seminar. And do you think that the quarantine had anything to do with any of this, or just coincidence?
For me personally, no, I think I'm very much in a mode, and have been for a little while, of acceptance and observing, my reality, and kind of making the best possible decisions based on what I see. So I think that's been more habitual for me the last few years.
Dave?
I would say I've been more stressed out. Just walk right in during the podcast, no problem. So yeah.
All right. So that wasn't the answer I was expecting. I think it was.
Okay.
Go ahead. No, I don't want you to change your answer.
No. I was waiting for my son to leave. Okay. So.
Can we please do a first show ever?
Yeah. So I was really stressed out, and at some point, I'm like, okay, I gotta get rid of all the shit that doesn't work in my life. So
now he's living in a big open field.
I thought your son just came into the room.
Dave's living in the build construct from the Matrix, the endless white room. He got rid of everything that didn't work.
Right. That's kind of where I am right now. So
Dave's been happy for quarantine because he's been sleeping at the Apple store.
If only.
I think it was, for me, I think that the timing was good, but I think that I've sort of realized a bunch of things that I maybe hadn't been realizing before, if that makes any sense. Like I kind of got mentally off kilter for a little bit, and I think that I got back into it, and I'm like, none of this is new, but boy, it sounds familiar, and it's nice, and I think that, but I don't think that it was necessarily quarantine or COVID sorts of related things that did that. I just think that it gave me fertile ground for stuff that was already happening. I think that was happening on its own timeline anyway, but then suddenly it was like, anytime that what you take for granted is disturbed, I think it forces me to recalibrate on everything, even things that aren't related, because it's just like, well, I'm just jarred. Like I don't, this is not normal. There's something going on here. I usually go out to dinner on Friday nights. So I think that it certainly didn't hurt me, which I feel a little guilty saying since it was such a shit show, but I don't think it hurt me.
That's fair.
Yeah. All right. Well, that ends the self-help seminar. Next week, we're going to be we're all going to attend an EST seminar. We're bringing that back. All right. So thanks everybody for listening. We go Tony Robbins for that.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah. All right. So thanks everybody for listening. Did anybody know what we're talking about next week? I just thought I'd venture that. I never know in advance. I should know. All right. Talk about collaboration next week. We'll have Jay Thorne on.
Again.
All right. Thanks everybody for listening. We will see you next week.
Peace out.
Bye-bye.
Bye.